can the existence of a registry help us deal with hidden findings? The answer is going to be sort of. So medicine is way ahead of the rest of us. Clinicaltrials.gov was launched in 1999 and has become much more widely used in the last decade. What ended up happening is a whole bunch of journal editors got together in 2005 and said, we're basically not going to publish your clinical trial anymore unless you've pre-registered it. The NIH also started really cracking down on this for funding. The FDA started cracking down. So there was this whole sort of squeeze about 10 years ago in medical research. And what you can see is there are lots of medical trials. And, a bunch were getting registered starting in 2000. Once the policy changed for the journals, then it just shot up. Okay, so what does Mathieu et al. Do? They look at 3 specific fields in some leading journals and just see how closely the published papers, how consistent they are with the registration of those particular studies. They want to get at the extent of selective reporting, and they find there's imperfect correspondence. So I think it's worth talking just a little bit about how exactly that is the case. A couple of summary stats on these articles. There's about 300 articles in total that they focus on, in a particular time period, in particular subfields with, published articles. A couple things to note. The majority of these studies were funded by industry. So this is a little bit of a different world than our social science world. Most published studies in economics, psychology, political science, sociology journals are not published by researchers sponsored by industry. That's a big difference. And again, there's this concern that that's contaminating research. Of course, there's a lot of university funding and whatnot. They're kind of spread across fields. So what goes missing? What do they find? And I want to just focus on the sort of ones with the arrows. A large share of the studies focus on a different primary outcome in the text than they did in the registration. So in the medical registry, it's a little different than some of the social science registries. They really pin you down on what is the primary outcome. Is it this particular condition? Is it mortality? And then you have secondary outcomes and you have exploratory outcomes. So you're supposed to focus on your main outcome, and you should always be reporting it somewhere. I mean, I think that's the idea. Like, even if for whatever reason you emphasize other things, if you registered you were going to look at mortality and then you suppress that, it feels like you're being a bit shifty. But in 10% of cases, it was omitted in the text. Is that high or low? What's your intuition or your feeling on that? Do you read this and say, oh my God, I can't trust medical research? I had a little bit of a different gut reaction. I was like, wow, these guys are better than us. This is like, the registry hasn't solved all problems. There's still a lot of problems. But at a minimum now we can see them. I mean, this is like the great advantage of the registry. We can do this, and we can argue over this number. Is this high or low? Or we can say, well, maybe half the time the data was missing. Like, we can really understand where the results disappear now. And before the medical registries existed, we had no way of doing this. We were like we are in social science now. We just really don't even know what the literature is telling us half the time because we don't know how many papers went unpublished. The other thing down here was, are there discrepancies in the primary outcomes relative to the registration that favor significant outcomes? Meaning, did they change their specification along the way or pick a robustness check to emphasize because it was more significant? Again, this is a little bit subjective. Half the time they say, well, we can't really tell. 10% of the time they say no, but they say around 40% of the time we still think there's some selective reporting. So maybe this number together with this number, now we're like, okay, there's still quite, the bottom line of Mathieu et al. Is like, there's still quite a bit of selective reporting, despite the registry. So there's different ways of viewing that. One way of viewing it is, well, gosh, this registry doesn't work. There's all these problems. They have a registry, it doesn't work. We're wasting our time with the registry. The other way to view it is sort of how I was, the point I was making before, several of us were making, which is like, now we can diagnose these problems, we can understand them, we can quantify them, we can work to improve them. Like all these this article got published in JAMA. Millions of doctors read that article. And these articles have an impact, and they keep pushing medicine to sort of have better and better rules around reporting.